Hello and welcome to this Energy Saving Trust webinar being run by the Green Heat Installer Engagement Programme, past 2030 and TrustMark registration, why and how to get your business there. Today we will hear from TrustMark experts on what TrustMark is, how it links to past 2030 and how you can register your business. My name is Rachel Comrie. I'm an Assistant Programme Manager for the Green Heat Installer Engagement Programme here at Energy Saving Trust. So our panellists for today's webinar are Pilar Rodriguez, the Green Heat Installer Engagement Programme Manager at Energy Saving Trust, Mark Stevens, Head of Energy Engagement at TrustMark, and Alex Gates, Managing Director at Simply Certification. So for this webinar, you can hear us, but we cannot hear you. This is perfectly normal for webinars, so don't be alarmed or worry about any background noise wherever you are watching this from. You'll have an opportunity to submit questions to our panelists by typing your questions on your questions pane of the control panel. These won't be visible to other listeners, but we will see them. To get the webinar's control panel, please press the orange arrow on your screen. If you're using a phone to watch this, there will be a question mark on your screen that you can press to ask questions. We will provide a question and answer session at the end once all panelists have presented. You can ask questions at any time during the webinar, however, they won't be addressed until the Q&A session. Due to the nature of webinars and internet speeds, you might notice a slight change in audio quality as we vary our presenters. However, we are recording today's webinar, so should you have any connection issues, it will be available to watch back. We will send out the link to the recording afterwards also. Please note no personal details will be seen in the recording. It's only the presentation and the presenters that will be recorded. Likewise, the presentation slides will be available for you to view a few days after the webinar has finished. Lastly, you can have your say at the end of this webinar. There will be a short feedback survey after the webinar has finished. That should only take a few moments. Please complete this if you can, so we can continue to improve the support that we offer. If you do not have time this afternoon, the survey is also included in our follow-up email, which you'll receive tomorrow. I will now pass on to Pilar Rodriguez at the Energy Saving Trust.
Thank you, Rachel. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. In the next slides, I will briefly introduce you to the opportunities and challenges presented to the insulation sector by Scotland's commitment to achieving net zero by 2045, including a whistle-stop tour on the Heating Buildings Bill consultation. I work for Energy Saving Trust. We are an independent organization working to address the climate emergency. My role is to manage the Green Heat Installer Engagement Programme, which is fully funded by the Scottish Government to support installers working in the energy efficiency and renewable technology sectors. As part of this work, we are delighted to have today TrustMark and Simple certification presenting on the processes to achieve past 2030 and TrustMark registration. The way we heat our homes, workplaces, and other buildings is the third largest cause of greenhouse gas emissions in Scotland. Polluting heating systems like oil and gas boilers will need to be replaced by clean heating systems like heat networks, heat pumps, or electric heating. The current state of switching to clean heating is far short of what is needed to reach net zero by 2045. So the Scottish Government has taken action to support more demand for clean heating systems by proposing new legislation. There is a consultation open as we speak on the proposals for the Heat in Buildings Bill, and I will encourage everyone here to send the responses before it closes on the 8th of March. The proposals for domestic properties include to prohibit I always struggle with that word, I'm sorry, prohibit the use of polluting heating systems by 2045, and the requirement to meet a minimum energy efficiency standard. These new proposals for legislation on energy efficiency and heating for the retrofit market, together with the legislation already in place for new builds that starts on the 1st of April, will create a big challenge for the supply chain, but equally a significant economic opportunity, which will hopefully encourage businesses to train and upskill so they are ready to deliver for the retrofit sector. I will just briefly go through the 2 key points that I already mentioned in my slide. The Scottish Government is proposing to legislate on a heating buildings standard, which consists of prohibiting the use of polluting systems after 2045 with trigger points before then, and the requirement to meet a minimum energy efficiency standard by the end of 2028 for the private rented sector and by the end of 2033 for owner-occupiers. There is a separate consultation as well on equivalent standard for social housing. For the private rented sector, the property should meet this energy efficiency standard before the end of 2028, even if it has a clean heating system installed. For all other privately owned homes, the property should meet this energy efficiency standard by the end of 2033, unless the property has installed a clean heating system by then. These new heating building standards for energy efficiency will bring many opportunities to the retrofit insulation sector in Scotland. To give you an indication of where we are at the moment, around 45,000 householders install energy efficiency measures every year. It is estimated that this will need to increase to around 100,000 per year by 2033. It is therefore essential that the supply chain is capable of delivering at the pace and scale required in all areas across Scotland. We will see a high demand for skilled workers to support future deployment rates of thermal insulation. It is estimated that the peak full-time equivalent workforce required for energy efficiency by 2030 will be somewhere between 4,500 to 5,400 installers of thermal insulation. The Scottish Government has already funding mechanisms in place to support energy retrofit across domestic properties, including privately owned and rented homes, along with social housing. Some of these schemes have been in place for several years. This longer-term approach to funding provides the certainty and continuity needed for householder demand to grow, and in turn for supply chain actors to invest in training to undertake retrofitting. We have developed a dedicated website that we call the Insulation Toolkit to support the sector's growth while increasing the quality of the work they delivered. This toolkit aims to encourage the sector to upskill and gain the relevant qualifications, such as the SVQ Insulation Building Treatment Level 5 and 6 that is available to the industry in Scotland through local colleges, as well as gaining the past 2030 standards and TrustMark registration, both required to access work funded in Scotland. We will hear more on the processes of achieving past 2030 and TrustMark registration from our next speakers. We also hope that this toolkit can support new businesses to join the sector and access the economic opportunity that is available in the retrofit market in Scotland. Just very briefly, before I finish my presentation, I just wanted to share the events that are organised by the Scottish Government to explain the proposals, what they proposing within the consultation. There is a link to the to Eventbrite to register for those events. And again, just to mention that the consultation closes on the 8th of March. So you still got plenty of time to send your responses. And those there are links as well further down where the document is and where the responses needs to be submitted. Last slide from myself, just to with the links that we have for the program. So I'll encourage the audience, if they not register, to register to our newsletter to receive updates from ourselves. Thank you so much. This is all from myself, and I'll pass it to Mark from TrustMark. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for inviting us. Yes, my name is Mark Stevens. I'm Head of Energy Engagement at TrustMark. So Paul Phillips, the Assurance Director, and myself ran a webinar October last year, and what we did is we gave a very brief overview of TrustMark and and PAS 2030 and what it would need to be actually become certificated and become TrustMark registered. The feedback we got and one of the thinking was that this process needs to go into a bit more detail. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run through a brief update on TrustMark for those that didn't join that previous webinar. And then I'm going to hand over to Alex Gates, who from Simply Certification, one of our scheme providers, who will go into a bit more depth and dispel some of the myths and challenges for PAS to make sure that the process looks as simple as possible as it is. So if we just go to the next slide, please. So TrustMark. TrustMark is actually a quality scheme which is government endorsed for improvements in and around the home. I'll talk about how it's structured in a minute, but effectively we have 37 scheme providers covering 114 home improvement types across the repair, maintenance industry and improvement industry. We have about 15,000 registered businesses, some scaling from single people through to large organisations with over 51,000 tradespeople. TrustMark is a not-for-profit social enterprise and it delivers a need for all-encompassing market quality that consumers can recognise and trust. So we just move on to the next slide, please. So I know this webinar is regarding energy efficiency, so it's just to give you a bit of background. TrustMark isn't just there for energy efficiency. It was written into the HM counts in 2016, but effectively it covers all measures across the board for the work within the home, ranging from builders, CCTV television, painters and decorators, and drainage and so on. And you can see sort of the trades that we cover here. So it's a broad area, but the one that we're going to focus in on today is particularly energy efficiency measures, and particular in Scotland as well. So if you could just go to the next slide. So how is it structured and how does it work? So what happens is that there is a master license agreement that has been set out by the Department for Business and Trade, which is the UK government. Within that master license agreement, they own the brand TrustMark, but TrustMark has that agreement with the department. And what that does is it authorises TrustMark to issue sub-licenses in accordance to that master license. Now, all of this is on our website. And what happens is that TrustMark will go out and audit scheme providers to meet the requirements of a sub-license and the master license. And then what would happen then is the scheme provider would then issue a license to a business. Now, this process effectively works through a whole series of audits and checks and areas. But the main thing to kind of understand for us is, and for this purpose is that anyone who registers under TrustMark through a scheme provider signs up to our framework operating requirement, which is effectively the engine of TrustMark. So it determines how the scheme providers register the businesses and also the codes of conduct within there. So we have a code of conduct, which sets out the expectations and requirements of the business, and a customer charter. And we also expect everyone works to the technical standards that are applicable to that sector. So the scheme providers are the experts. They are the bodies that actually do the assessments, but what they also signed up to is schemes, which simply was one of them, who we'll be hearing from in a bit, sign up to that code of conduct and those the framework as well. And they will sign up to the sub-license agreement. So if you move to the next slide. So TrustMark is not a direct registration scheme. a scheme provider must ensure the registered business meets the requirement of the TrustMark framework operating requirement. We check the scheme providers check the businesses. Businesses then register through the scheme provider, and then they can register with TrustMark. Again, this is quite a simple process, which we'll talk about in a bit, and Alex will just talk about the PAS 2030. So once an approved scheme provider, they're responsible to ensure the technical competence of the registered business and or the individual. So they would be expected to carry out monitoring throughout the process. Now, TrustMark also does its monitoring of the schemes, but also outside of some of the energy efficiency screens, we do direct monitoring of businesses and assessors as well. The scheme provider must ensure that registered individuals meet the requirements of the framework. And that framework has been agreed upon and constructed with the support of the UK government. So effectively, what it's designed to do is to meet the requirements of the master license agreement and the sub-license agreement. Can you move to the next slide, please? So for the benefit of this webinar, we're going to be talking about PAS 2030. PAS 2030 is a public available specification. It was written over a decade ago to provide a specification for the installation of energy efficiency measures. Now, that has gone through many iterations starting from 2012. The versions currently was 2019, but that version has now been superseded by 2023. That actually was released in September, and this link is in the pack, so you can actually download it now for free from the BSI website. It was chargeable, but it's actually now free. Now, the process for gaining PAS certification isn't through TrustMark, it's through a UCAS certification body. Now, there's the certification bodies on the right-hand side there, you'll see, and one of them is simply who have the call, and Alex will go through that process a bit later. Now, once you actually are registered, gained PAS 2030, you can then become registered through that scheme provider onto TrustMark. Now, the Scotland's schemes require that PAS 2030's certification is needed for anyone installing solid wall measures, underfloor insulation measures, room and roof, and flat roof insulation. So that's a bit of a guide of what PAS is, and if we move to the next slide. So some of the benefits here, I won't go into all of them, but basically by becoming a member, there are also benefits that we work to because of the volumes of memberships that we have. So we have agreements with many organisations. So one of them being also, which is the Dispute Resolution Ombudsman, which is a part of the process that if there is a dispute, we can support a scheme and a business through that process in the event of any issues. I'll just go to the next slide. So how do you join TrustMark? There's a website fill-in form. There's a link there. And then what you would do is choose your scheme provider. And there's a list of the schemes that provide PAS 2030 certification, one of them being Simply. And then you submit your application and wait for approval. You can also apply directly to a scheme through their processes as well. But what we will do is we will then pass through this process on our website. We either pass the details to the scheme to contact yourself. So that's a very brief overview of TrustMark. So I'm just going to now, if you move to the next slide, I'm going to hand over to Alex Gates, who is the Managing Director at Simply Certification, and I'll be available for questions at the end. So over to you, Alex.
Hi, thanks, Mark. Good evening, and I want to wish everybody a happy Valentine's too. Thank you for organising this on the evening. I was going to dash off on a date, but never mind, just joking. So basically, Simply Certification, if I can just move to the next slide. Sorry, Simply Certification, we are a certification body and a TrustMark scheme provider that Mark mentioned. What we're about is that we come out and carry out the assessments on behalf of TrustMark and against the PAS 2030 standards. We do that as one combined audit, so our customers don't recognise they're going through two types of audits. We basically pride ourselves in being a supportive certification service. We launched in August 2020. Our mission was to provide a very more straightforward pathway into gaining certification. Doesn't matter what standard you go for. We wanted to make sure that our team at head office, for anybody who contacts and onboards with us, gets a supportive approach. We pride ourselves on having values such as being collaborative and responsive to our customers. which all adds in getting you through that process as quickly and as pain-free as possible. I think we've all gone through some sort of audit in our lifetime, whether it's construction line, ISO 9001, we get audited by UCAS. And what we don't want is people to feel like they dread that process. So we've created the scheme where it's compliant, but the idea is that it's very straightforward, simple, easy to understand, and we actually take you through step by step. The assessments that we carry out make sure that your business is protected. So if you are about to embark onto a contract, it just makes sure that when we're carrying out our audits, we're identifying little risks that there may be, so that you can put those risks, you can address those risks and reduce any future issues that you may have. So that's more of a value added as well. So what we always want to talk about when we talk about certification, it's not just about the certificate, it's about the actual whole value that adds to your business. The other thing that we don't want to do is we would want to be seen as a stuffy auditor that comes in and polices our customers. It's really important that we're engaging with you and helping you through that process as much as we can, as retaining that impartiality, of course, but making you feel that experience is that you're getting some value out of it, and then you're not actually getting policed through the process. So it's not a scary process that you're actually going to be going through. The next slide, please. So our role, as I said, is to carry out those impartial assessments. We are not a consultancy, so we can't help you get assessment ready. Anybody that comes to us, we'd expect you to be ready for assessment. However, we can provide information of the things that you would need to put in place prior to being assessed. We carry out assessments and certification for a range of standards, as you can see on the screen there. I'm not going to bore you with each and every single one of them. The one I'm here to talk about today is PAS 2030 and the TrustMark scheme that we assess against. There is also, we do NCS as well, that may be of interest to some. And that would be the next slide, please. So just coming from the slides prior as to why you would want to do this, there's estimate $300 billion industry that you can tap into. There's a whole host of schemes out there in Scotland and in England. So you can also not just work in Scotland, you can work in England with PAS 2030 and TrustMark. So it's really kind of widening those opportunities for your business. So it actually, as I said, it's not just about the certification, it's about the opportunities that it's actually presenting to you as a business. Next slide. So every day we deal with contractors and installers that come to Simply Certification. We're currently working, we've got around about, the last count I think was about 190 live certification holders for PAS 2030. Majority of our customers that have started with us, they've all stayed with us, and they we as I say, we work very closely with new businesses as well that are new to this. So we hear the same things over and over again. The fear that it's too complicated, organisations don't know where to start, is it expensive? It's another compliance thing that people are going to have to adhere to. You've obviously got things like construction line, CHAS, SSIP schemes, ISO 9001. Oh my word, it's another one to have to think about. And why would you bother? So I just want to kind of go through these key kind of concerns about PAS 2030. So in terms of it being too complicated, it's actually not as difficult as you may think. The biggest piece of advice that I would give anybody that's going through this process is to download that standard that Mark had presented to you. It's free, and to actually read it. I am by trade a marketer. I'm not actually technically involved around PAS 2035 and PAS 2030. I read it and I understood it. So the actual standard itself is not that difficult. You can absorb it very quickly. It's not thick. in terms of the number of pages within it. It's really quite a sensible process that you would need to adopt. So it really isn't that difficult. We do have online training, a course that lasts about 4 hours that goes through the standard also. So if you feel like you can't pick up and get that free standard to read it initially, you can go on a course to kind of go through that. And as I say, it's an online learning, you can access that anywhere. And then that will take you through, and then it can kind of help you absorb exactly what it is and what it is you would need to have in place to be compliant. So you don't know where to start. There's so much support out there at the moment. We have a really good network of partners, some really good consultants that are out there that don't charge the earth. There are systems, QMS systems ready to access that you can adopt straight away within your organisation, and with a little bit of help. So reading the standard, and if you do need that additional help, is seek the advice of a consultant that could help you. And as I say, there's a link on our website. We've got a trusted partner network, so we actually carry out an interview with people that come to us that want referrals. We're not allowed to directly refer because we have to be impartial, but we've carried out a series of interviews, and then we've added trusted partners on our website, which I can share the link with if anybody wants that. And then you can contact them and have a chat with them as well. So, you know, that's a really good place to start. In terms of being too expensive, if I was to tell you that payback, because usually within 1 or 2 installations, that return on investment is very quick. Initial prices for it is £1,400 for the certification, possibly additional costs for support if you do require that. So in the grand scheme of things, it isn't expensive when you think about the return on investment, how quickly you can get that back. Ongoing costs, there is a cost to retain it, but that's always in line with how big you are as a business. So you're not going to get extortionate costs as a small business that's doing a small number of installs, but the larger you do get, you would have to have more technical inspections, which I'll talk about later in the slides. But to me, in terms of expense, people spend far more on probably laptops and iPads than obviously going through this, and perhaps they wouldn't give you as much of it as a return, but there is a good, strong return on investment in it. Why would you bother? Says we. Why would I bother? My order book is full for the next 12 months. Now, this is something that we kind of see all of the time, and it's a fair point. If you, as a contractor or installer, you're getting calls all of the time, you're getting inbound inquiries, your order book's full, why on earth would you do this? I suppose it's kind of about what you want to do as a business. If you want to grow, your business, if you don't want to grow your business and you're happy having a business that just kind of pays the bills, then fair enough. But if you are actually wanting to kind of, really extend your portfolio of what you offer to customers, and you want to future-proof your business as well, it's a really good idea to go down, particularly if you're offering repair and maintenance in that sector anyway. Having this as a compliance it will be really strong in the future. There's not just obviously the domestic market. There's obviously there's commercial building stock out there. We're getting a lot more larger organisations that are looking at PAS 2038, which that's all about commercial buildings, and installers that work on those projects will have to be PAS 2030 certified, and they'll also have to be NCS certified. So in terms of the opportunities now and in the future, it's what I would recommend as a marketing and business consultant in the past, is you always have to look ahead, and it's really important to do so. That's the next slide, please. So I'm just going to talk through the next few slides, actually how you're going to get there. So I'm going to give you a quite nice overview. So we've got PAS 2030, and then obviously we've got TrustMark, the TrustMark scheme. So the two are tied together, the two are linked together. Next slide. So I'm going to break this down. So there's the getting assessment ready part, which is the vital part. The more ready you are, the easier it is. It's as simple as that. And I keep on saying, and this is something we say to customers all the time: have you read the standard? Have you downloaded that standard? Have you read the standard? That will really help you. So get assessment ready. I'll talk you through that, and then I'm going to talk you through what that assessment and certification process looks like. Next slide, please. So we have got a full checklist available. Again, I can send the links to the team that can forward it on to anyone that's attended. So there's a full checklist there of exactly what you would need and what I'm about to talk through. So the first key thing is obviously having the right insurances in place. So I hope to think that everybody on the call have got public liability, employers liability, and professional indemnity insurance. The insurance isn't dictated by the PAS in terms of the level. That's up to your insurance provider. So they would advise you what the right level is for the size of your business and what you're actually installing. The other area you need to look at if you are subcontracting is that your subcontractors have got the relevant insurance in place too. The last one, which is in red, something that you would need to look in pretty soon, is the insurance back guarantee. So there's plenty of providers on the TrustMark website there for you to look at. Now that's just basically to have in place, so if there's anything happens down the line in terms of if your business isn't there anymore, if something goes wrong with the installation that you've done, there is an insurance there for the homeowner or the tenant. Next slide, please. So I think this is probably the biggest, scariest area that they have a perception that it's the scariest area, but it's not. So a quality management system is basically a set of documents and procedures that your business adopts. So things like from how a customer's handled, to how you price for a job, to how you take in your products from your suppliers and how they're quality checked. So it covers a whole host of how you operate within that business. So it's just, as I say, a set of documents, processes and procedures. You could have in your quality management system a list of forms that you complete that's kind of saved somewhere. So it's all about that day-to-day management of how you run your business. Now, the quality management system that you would need to have, if you haven't got one already, that would need to have and meet the requirements of the PAS 2030 2019 for now, and as Mark said, the 2023 version in the next few months. So that is probably the biggest area that people get a little bit concerned about. Now, as a business, you probably don't realise that you've already got processes and procedures already in place. You just might not be formalising them properly. So if it's something that is brand new to you, what we would suggest doing is seeking the advice of a specialist or a consultant within PAS 2030. The format of what these documents can be in, you can have them in Dropbox, you can have them on Google Drive, it really doesn't matter as long as they meet within those standards. There's a whole host of quality management systems out there. People may have heard of Trade Engine, Easy Green Deal will come across, Green Hub. There's a whole host out there that are ready to set up that you can access if you do need that additional support. You don't want to kind of create your own. But as I said, it's not as hard as you think. And again, if you read the standard or attend the training, it would all fit into place and you would understand this. If you do need any help, again, we can put you in the right direction on our Trusted Partners Network. Our Trusted Partners Network, we've got a link on our website there. Next slide, please. The other big area around PAS 2030 is competency. So the things that we're looking at is that the people that are working on the installation are competent to do so. So there's a role that some of you may have heard, which is the retrofit coordinator role. Now that role typically sits outside of your installation company, but as the installer, you have to make sure that that retrofit that you're putting into the property has been overseen by a qualified retrofit coordinator. That retrofit coordinator, normally if you operate as part of a larger supply chain, the principal contractor will employ the retrofit coordinator. It could be that it's somebody that sits as an external consultant. There are some installation companies that do have a retrofit coordinator that work directly for them. That could be argued whether that's impartial or not, but that is something that people do, and that's absolutely fine at the moment. But that role itself, the retrofit coordinator, is a level 5 in retrofit and risk, retrofit coordination and risk assessment, and that role has to oversee the whole of the retrofit design, going in from assessment, design, and installation. So we would look to see who has given you the retrofit design. Okay. And the installation team, so whether they're employed or subcontracted, they need to have the relevant recognised qualifications in line with the measures that they are in fact installing, which I'll talk, I think it's on the next slide, please. So the installer competency, so the insulation measures, so if you think of things like in external wall insulation, cavity wall, you would need to have, there's at least 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 in some measures. Installers would have to have that NVQ or SVQ within that relevant pathway on the building treatments and insulation. Again, we can point you in the right direction of, there's a whole host of providers that offer the qualifications for that. We, Simply Certification, have also got a company called Simply Learning, and we offer the NVQ aspect of that. But that's basically a peoples-based competency assessment on whether that installer meets the requirements of that pathway and that measure. For the electrical measures, you would look to see if you have anything like 18th edition. So that would be for anything like electric storage heaters or LED lighting. For any gas measures, we'd expect to see that the installer is gas safeguarded. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to talk through the actual assessment and certification process. The next slide. So the first stage is when your assessment ready, when you've got your quality management system in place, when you feel that all your installers are competent and you know that the installation that you're going to be delivering is going to be by a retrofit coordinator. We'll just go through the application process, which is dead straightforward. It's online. It's basically taking the information about your company, any current certification that you've got, information around any subcontractors, employees you have, and we also look to see how ready you are as well. So if we, from the application, what we do as a certification body, the ones might be slightly different. We want to make sure that you're ready for assessment. We don't want to get you to a stage where you're kind of ready for your head office assessment the next day, and there's a whole host of work to do. So what we've got kind of processes in place that identifies where you are with that. So it just means that you're not going to be stuck. Next slide, please. So that access to that, again, I can share that link if it's something that you want to look at with us. And that's just basically, say, online. I think most certification bodies are probably the same, where they'll have an online area where you can fill in the application form for PAS 2030. Our form is for PAS 2030, MCS and TrustMark, so we combine it as one application. So you would just tick which standards and schemes you want to go for on there, but it's a very straightforward. It will take you around about 10 minutes to complete. Next slide, please. So each certification body could be slightly different in terms of what their scheme is. So we all follow PAS 2031 is a certification body, and we develop our scheme based off the back of that. So there may be some certification bodies approach it slightly differently, but I'm going to talk you through how we would as a certification body. So we have a head office assessment. It takes at least a day. So we book out the time of an assessor for 1 day. It's a paperwork assessment, so we're looking at that quality management system. That's the first port of call. So we're looking at your paperwork within there, looking at your processes, your procedures, just to make sure they are all aligned with PAS 2030. And what we do at the same time as well is look out for things like your customer charters and anything that's linked with TrustMark. So what you'll feel is you're having an assessment, but you think you're having one assessment, but we're actually collecting evidence for two reasons, for TrustMark and for PAS 2030. The assessment's normally done on Teams, unless there's any reason why we would want to come out on site, or you might want to request it to be on site. Some people prefer Teams. Well, I'd say probably 95% of our client base prefer Teams. It tends to be the larger organisations prefer us to go on site. We identify that the organisation meets PAS 2030 through that quality management system, and that you've got the relevant skills and knowledge within the business to meet the standard. Next slide, please. Following on from the head office assessment, we carry out what they call technical inspections. The third box there on the slide I'm going to talk about first. So there may be people on the session here that are thinking, how on earth can you carry out a technical inspection if we're not actually installing for PAS 2030 at the moment? And that's always been the big sticking point with PAS 2030, and this is why our scheme is different to other certification bodies, is because we've got a capability and competency assessment. So this is for companies that are brand new, you know, you're brand new to PAS 2030, I should say. So you haven't been given a job to install any measures under PAS 2030 scheme simply because you haven't got the certificate. So you end up on that chicken and egg cycle. What we do is we carry out a capability and competence assessment, and this means that we carry out extra time on that head office to talk to you and your teams about kind of the installation practices that you use, and then that allows us to make that decision whether we're confident or not that your team can install to PAS 2030. So that allows us to issue certification at that point. And then that means that you can go away and then qualify for the different frameworks and tenders and funding schemes that are out there. And then, but what's so important is that as soon as you do get a job in, that you let us know, and then we carry out that technical inspection at a later measure. And that's allowed under the PAS 2031 scheme. So we've adopted that, and UCAS are quite happy with us doing that. And what that means is we've enabled to get a lot more new entrants into the PAS 2030 market than any other certification body because of our approach to the scheme. So once you have got a job for us to inspect, so if you are installing or later down the line, you contact us, you've got your certification through the capability and competency route, we come out and carry out the full technical inspection against each of the measures at site. If you have had a head office assessment and you are installing, we want to carry out within 3 months of that head office assessment. Reason being, a lot of things can change within a head office within 3 months. Businesses change quite rapidly, so we want to make sure that you're still aligned to the standard. So what we want to do is carry out those technical inspections within 3 months. So most measures under PAS 2030 need to be assessed pre, mid and post, and that particularly the insulation measures. There's certain measures that can only be done post, such as like heating controls, but most of them are actually pre, mid and post, and we aim to do most of them on site. We'll have to be sensible, of course. If there is a large insulation job that's going on, like an AWI, that might be happening over a 2-week period. It's not really logistically possible to hang around for 2 or 3 weeks on the job, or that would cost a lot of money. So we're very sensible about that. We'll collect as much evidence as we can online, and then maybe the post we take evidence through video and photographic evidence, and then again pick up its surveillance that measure at that stage, so we're always covered. Your paperwork for the technical inspection, as a certification body, would always expect to get that in at least 48 hours prior to the inspection. That's just to make sure everything's prepared and again goes as smooth as possible. What we don't want to do is come out on site and the installer be scratching his head trying to find where all the paperwork is, like a rabbit caught in a headlight. So it's just best that it's all submitted prior, and that gives our assessor a chance to read through the paperwork and be prepared before we go on site, so that the process is just so much smoother. Next slide, please. So the certification. So once you've gone through that process, the $1 million question is always, how long does it take? If I told you that it can take 7 days, everyone would be over the moon, and we have done it in 7 days. However, I think the more realistic is around about 4 to 6 weeks by the time, particularly if we're carrying out technical inspections. But yeah, it can take, we do aim to try and kind of get it over and done with for everybody within a 6-week period. TrustMark's included. TrustMark certification is also issued, and your organisation will be added to the Green Deal Orb and TrustMark on completion, and that's a 12-month certification. Next slide, please. One thing that happens next is that you are a live certification holder. Now, that doesn't mean that you never have to see us again for another year, unfortunately. We carry out surveillance throughout the whole term of that certification, and that's part of the agreement. So I think this is one area that was a little bit grey in previous standards, but basically once you gain certification, you then let us know all the installations that you are carrying out. Once you hit a threshold, so we carry out a percentage, so it's normally 1 to 10% of the installations will be inspected. So if you're an organisation that does around about 300 installs a year, for argument's sake, I'm trying to keep the math simple because I'm not very good, and you have 10%, you need 10% inspected, that would obviously be 30 installs that would need to be inspected over the year. That's 30 inspections, not 30 installs. And then if it was obviously you're on a 5% installation rate, that would be 15. Now, an inspection is counted as pre, mid or post. So if we came to a job and we could collect evidence of pre, mid and post, that would be 3 inspections done in one go. If you are a high volume installer, what we would aim to do is, rather than leave everything at the end of the year, is we plan out an audit, a surveillance program with you and carry out maybe 3 or 4 inspections a month and do it all nice and tidy, so it doesn't become a headache for you. Next slide, please. So the benefits to PAS 2030, I mean, probably the proof's in the pudding, and you know, if I could have had some of our installers come on this call, it would be better coming from them than myself, but just from what we've seen, as you qualify to deliver under various schemes, as I've stated before, it future-proofs your business. There's a huge drive, obviously, around retrofit, and you know you've got to be part of this. It instills trust and confidence in your company. Having the TrustMark badge on your van, you know, it's the only government endorsed scheme out there, so it really sits well. Opens up huge opportunities for you. There's the tenders that are coming out now are frequent, all state that you need to have PAS 2030 and TrustMark on any retrofit programme, and you're accessing the growing marketplace there. Next slide, please. Where to start? I've thrown up a couple of links there. Again, there's a free gap analysis that you can use on that link. So that's one of our trusted network of providers, and you can put all your information in there online. It costs you nothing, and it just basically gives you an outline of where you are now against the standard, and tells you the areas of what you would need to do. And that gives you a really good starting point, so you know exactly where to begin. Or if you feel you're ready, you can go through the application process with us on that link there. Next slide, please. Oh, that's it. I think hopefully that was timed well.